is Rick Van Hemmen.
In progress.
I'm the president of Navigate Maritime. Thank you for joining us here at Bahrs and also remote on Zoom. Before we start the presentation, I'd just like to make a couple of announcements. We'll have another presentation April 21. That will be our last or next to last presentation. It's always a little fuzzy as to how things turn up. May 7 is May 3. May 3 is the a member reception at the Grover House in anticipation of the Weekend in Old Monmouth, which is the Monmouth County Historical Society tour for and open houses for all the historic properties. It's a great event. We did it last year. We certainly would like members to drop us a nickel if they would like to volunteer over the weekend too, which is May 4 and 5. It's a really enjoyable thing. You just kind of sit on the porch and hang out, and people come by and get to chat and take their name and even do little tours. River Rangers will run again this year. We'll have 3 weeks in. It's 1 in July, 2 in August, right? Oh, sorry, 50% chance I was wrong. 2 in July, 1 in August. Sign up early. We tend to have very good turnout on this. We're also, as an announcement issue, we're also making our gear available to the charter school, which also will have 2 weeks for their own students. So it looks like these boats will be in the water for 5 weeks. We're doing renovation in the Grover House Saturdays between 10 o'clock and noon. If anybody feels like they would like to push a paintbrush or my favorite thing actually is scraping windows. I don't know why, but I take a little scrape and I scrape the window frames. If you want to do that kind of stuff, come out to the Grover House 10 to 12. It's kind of fun. It is relaxing fun. We'll do many more things as the summer comes along. I see over here April 7th, South Street Seaport. I missed that.
It's the South Street Seaport running a sea shanty session.
I'll repeat that. Don't worry about it. So Michael just said that South Street Seaport is running a sea shanty session on April 7th, which is a weekend. No, it's a Wednesday. Sunday, April 7th. April 21 is the presentation. April 21, 14 days. So wouldn't 7 be a Wednesday also? 14 days? Never mind. So it's a sea shanty thing. So we can go out to South Streetport. I'm sure we'll organize it as a community trip, which we now call maritime meetups. That's what we call them. And we still have the Barnegat Light and New Jersey Maritime Museum somewhere in the offing too. All these announcements will come up as we go along. So anyway, thank you for coming. I'd like to introduce our speaker. Is it Vince or Vincent?
All work.
Vince Dicks, and he is going to do a presentation on the Forsaken Kings, but mostly about Emma Spreckels, the well-known surfing queen of Asbury Park.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Oh, the cookies. Yes, thank you. The cookies were donated by. Hang on, I appreciate that, and very very sorry. The cookies were donated by Cozy Corner Bakery. So thank you. If you're eating cookies, please say thank you. And if you're on Zoom, I can assure you they're delicious.
The Cozy Cookie is on 1 West Avenue in Atlantic Highlands. There you go. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, Cozy Cookies. Good evening to everyone that's here personally and online. It's great to see you, and I'm grateful to be here. My name is Vinny Dicks. I'm an author. I'm based in Girt, New Jersey, and today we're here to talk about my book, Forsaken Kings. And I've written 3 books focused on local history. The first is Girt, the last town at the Jersey Shore. It's really a history of the New Jersey Shore. It's its history from the very beginning, its formation, and why it took so long for Girt, which was incorporated in 1917 as a borough, why it took so long for that to happen. And it is peculiar because there was bank fraud, there was kiting of checks, there were runaway bank managers and bankruptcies, which contributed to that. And then right next door to Girt, where I live, is Spring Lake. Both towns were founded simultaneously with very different outcomes in terms of how the towns organized. And the women who saved Spring Lake are really about the women that created the town itself. There were, in a time when it was 5-to-1 men to women business owners, it was the other way in Spring Lake. So it's an interesting story about Spring Lake. And you can get both of those books at my website. It's vincentdicks.com, or on your favorite giant deliver tomorrow kind of bookstore that you can get. This talk today is dedicated to my aunt. This is my Aunt Teresa. She died this month in her 98th year. She's a gentle lady and a mother of 11. Her daughter, Margaret, read Forsaken Kings to her. Margaret volunteered to be an early reader, and she was kind enough to read it to my aunt. And my biggest fear, Forsaken Kings is historical fiction. It's very tightly based on the history, and we'll go through some of that. But putting myself in the shoes of a teenage girl as an older gentleman is not easy. And I was very worried that in writing that the female voice wouldn't come through. I met and married a teenage girl, and I have a daughter myself, and I had 3 sisters, but still, it was tough to make sure that I was doing it right. But Teresa really connected with her daughter as she read it to her. She told her stories about her mother. Remember, Teresa, being as old as she was, her mom grew up in the era that we're going to talk about. And she talked to her daughter about how things were then and how women were treated. And it really resonated with her. And they cried together and they read together. And so, sometimes you have an impact on one person. It makes the whole thing worthwhile. So that's to her. The subject we're going to talk about is this newspaper, which is the National Police Gazette. And it's there up on the screen. And the surfer girl that's standing there looking so graceful, standing on a plank, was the Sports Illustrated or National Enquirer of its day. It was founded by a guy named Richard K. Fox. And it appealed to people who couldn't read because it had lots of pictures, which was obvious. And there were a lot of Americans who were immigrants who could read poorly. This story was perfect for Fox, whether it was true or not. And it was written in a way that sounded almost like it was sensationalized. A group of summer loungers on the beach at Asbury Park are watching the antics of a bronze-faced girl in the sea this morning, the object of all this interest. And it goes on to talk about how she stood up on the board, how she wore fancy clothes, and you can see there's a picture here that was taken contemporaneously. This is an 1888 picture of the Bahrs family on the beach in Girt. And you can see they wore woolen outfits. The surfer girl was described as wearing skirts above her knee, showing her arms that were muscular. This just really was not done. Her hair had a filigree of silver in it, but she was unnamed. And so this mystery went around for a while, people wondering what it was. But interesting, this is the small world slide here. The house there is on Fox Hill Road in Little Silver. And that's Richard K. Fox's house. He had that house built with the proceeds from the newspaper that he owned. And he financed the Fox, which was, and I learned about it by reading on your website. The Seabright Skiff Fox was funded by Richard Fox because this sensational event that he sponsored, guys rowing across the Atlantic Ocean, which happened in 1896, was one of those dangerous things that would be wonderful for him to write about in the Gazette. And so he wasn't beyond making up stories, but also having the stories happen. So he paid for the ship, the boat, and he had it towed across the bay into Brooklyn, where they started. The actual rowing started out of Brooklyn. And this was a news article from when they were noticed off the coast of just before they wound up landing in France. And so there's a little tie-in to your organization, which is interesting. Our story went to North Carolina. And in North Carolina, the guy hugging the surfboard here is a guy named Skipper Funderburg, who I befriended a few years ago. Skipper's in his 70s now, but was a bad boy surfer in Cape Fear, North Carolina, starting in the 1950s. He is in the museum business now. He's a docent at the Wrightsville, North Carolina museum there. And the museum put up a sign indicating that they were the home of East Coast surfing. Back in 1909, they have documented evidence of a group of gentlemen surfing there. And so they took the claim from this guy who previously was written up as being the first to surf. Certainly he was the most famous to surf. It's Duke Kamanahoku. Duke was an Olympian, incredibly fast swimmer. And he won gold and silver for the United States in the 1912 Olympics. On his way home, he stopped in Atlantic City and gave a demonstration, including surfing. And prior to the Wrightsville claim, that was the first surfer. But Skipper wasn't convinced. He saw the article, the picture of the surfer girl, and he wondered, can I dig a little deeper? And he found this article. And this is from the Philadelphia Press. So the Philadelphia Press, for background, the Associated Press, or UPI, are news distributor services. They take stories that are written by syndicated authors, and then they distribute them all over the place. It wasn't actually a newspaper. But the Philadelphia Press put this article in several newspapers, and it was a detailed article, same article that was in the Gazette, but certainly not trying to get sensational headlines, but just telling a story of this girl. It still didn't name her. It gave us a little more detail. It said she was formerly trained in dance. She was the belle of the ball at the hops. In those days, you would do Germans and hops at the local hotels. She was there for 4 days. She was refined. She didn't speak like the people from the street. She had a refined accent, and again, she wasn't named. So Skipper was ready to give up, and but he did dig, and after that article was found, he asked the Asbury Park Press to do a little research, and they took an intern and said, go through our files and see what you can come up with. And they came up with this. The undersigned desires to know the whereabouts of a young lady from the Sandwich Islands who was stopping in the park. Someone who had read the press article put an advertisement in there. It's J.L. Graham, Seabright, New Jersey. Skipper said, I can't follow this any further. In fact, he resigned himself that this was myth. And that's when I contacted Skipper, because I didn't think it was that hard a problem to solve. The story said that her father was an incredibly wealthy planter from the Sandwich Islands, Hawaii, and she was making her way around the country. And J.L. Graham of Seabright was listed there. How many J.L. Grahams could there be in Seabright in 1888? Can't be that many. Turns out J.L. Graham wasn't from Seabright. He was from Rumson. This is Harborage, which is on Ward Avenue in Rumson. If you look now, you cross the bridge, there's a new construction. This house was just torn down in the last 2 or 3 years. But this is what it looked like just a few years ago when it was for sale. But this house in 1888 was owned by J.L. Graham's father. John Lorimer Graham's father was Malcolm Graham. Malcolm Graham was from New York, and he summered here. He was a partner in Schuyler, Hartley, and Graham. They supplied military goods, armaments, to the Union Army during the Civil War. So he had lots and lots of money because we sold lots and lots of guns and outfitted many people, and he was really wealthy. So why would his son be looking for the girl who was in the park from the Sandwich Islands? That was the next question I asked. And this is the woman who he married. This is Eleanor Coney Graham. This is the wife of John Lorimer Graham. Her mother She was from Hawaii. Her mother was an ali'i, Hawaiian royalty. Her father was from New York, from upstate New York. He was the sheriff of Hilo. And Mark Twain actually stayed with the family when he visited Hawaii. That's how I wound up tripping over the Coney family. She had sailed around the world with her sisters. And at some point during her journey, she met John Lorimer Graham, the wealthy young man who was going to inherit his father's fortune. Kai Kalani was her Hawaiian name. This woman was terribly unhappy. She didn't look very happy in this portrait either, but she was terribly unhappy. Graham liked the concept of marrying a Hawaiian princess. He bragged about it, but not having a Hawaiian wife. At this time, she had a baby and she was pregnant with her second child. She was convalescing here at Harbridge, waiting to have her baby. So he was looking to find who the surfer girl was, most likely to cheer up his wife. Unfortunately, Graham would be caught cheating with another woman in another short year, and Eleanor Coney Graham would file for divorce. And I followed her life, and she married a painter, Hubert Voss, and Voss painted this painting. But interestingly, she had some interaction with some other people. So I said, this problem's a solvable problem. Knowing how ships went back and forth between Hawaii, many ships went around South America, stopped in Hawaii, and then went to California. People left Hawaii. It was in the newspaper. There were ship's logs. There weren't that many of them. There were manifests. So I said, well, if her father was a planter, meaning a plantation owner, and they had to be in this part of the world in 1888, we could figure out who this is. It's just a matter of elimination. So I made a big spreadsheet. I said, let's get a list of all the plantations in the island. I went to the Planters Monthly, the Planters Labor and Supply Company provided that, and there's a list in there. It's advertisements for every single plantation, sugar, rice, whatever you were farming. The owners were there, the managers were there, the partners who had invested in it were there. So I put them down one side of the spreadsheet. I made a column to say, did they have any daughters? Were those daughters of age in 1888? Could they have been between, 12 and 30 years old? Did they travel away from the islands? Did they travel to the East Coast? What would their motive be for being here? And is there a logical reason why they would be left out? They would want their name left out of the story. So here's our prime suspect. This is German immigrant Claus Spreckels and his daughter. His daughter's name is Emma. And in 1888, Emma was about 18 years old. Perfect age. There were really no other candidates. There was one judge from Kauai who did not bring his daughter, who was in Philadelphia around the same time. But every single other name was canceled out because they either didn't travel to the United States or they didn't have a daughter. Now, Claus Spreckels is the guy who introduced the sugar cube to the United States. He was the largest producer of sugar west of the Mississippi. And we'll give you a little bit of background on Claus. This is Claus's house in 1851 in Charleston, South Carolina. He came to the United States with 75 cents in his pocket. He was a refugee from Hanover, Germany. He didn't want to go to service. They were drafting all the young men. So his parents put him on a boat. He apprenticed in a grocery store. In a year and a half, bought the grocery store from the retiring gentleman who owned it, and opened his own store in this building, in the first floor of this building. Unfortunately, he was chased out of Charleston for selling liquor to African Americans. It was before the Civil War, and it was illegal from 1831 forward to sell alcohol to blacks. So he married his childhood sweetheart, had her come over. They got married in New York. He went out to San Francisco with his brother-in-laws, and he opened the Albany Brewery. He became the second largest brewer in San Francisco, making what they call workman's ale, the kind of beer that you would drink after work every day. He bought sugar for his brewery, and he noticed that the sugar refinery, which was in San Francisco, was wasteful. They were dumping their molasses into the sewers. They weren't using it. And he said, if that business is that profitable that you could take a good product and throw it away, that's the business I want to be in. So he he left everything behind. He sold the brewery, took the money that he got for selling the brewery. He went to Germany and studied the equipment. He bought a bunch of equipment and then became the largest sugar maker in California. When the Civil War decimated Louisiana and all their labor was set free, it became very difficult for Louisiana to compete in domestic sugar. And so the United States, in looking for some cheap sugar, looked to Hawaii and came up with an agreement with the new king, a guy named David Kalakaua. And they agreed that there would be reciprocity between the two countries and there would be no tariff. Well, the international tariff to bring in sugar into the United States was 2 cents for a product that sold for 8. So you can imagine the opportunity for some sugar grower to want to bring in raw sugar into the United States. Spreckels happened to be the closest and the most opportunistic. So he brought in all the sugar, not just some of the sugar. He went to Hawaii on the next ship and bought every single bit of sugar that was there. As a result, he built this giant mansion in a neighborhood called Punahou. If you've heard of Punahou, it's the school that Obama went to when he was a kid. It was a private school there. Some of the Hawaiian royalty went there. His daughter, Emma, and his son, Rudolph, also went there. This picture was taken of the house after the house was abandoned. Reason it was abandoned is because Claus figured out that the sugar beet might be better than sugar cane, because that reciprocity treaty 20 years later, now we've moved forward from 1874 up into the 90s, might have been repealed. And if you could grow sugar domestically, meaning in California, and sugar was grown in Europe via sugar beets, and he wanted to copy the methodology. And so he started experimenting growing sugar beets in California to offset the risk that he had in Hawaiian sugar. He figured it would beat out the Cuban, the Philippine, the Jamaican, and the Hawaiian sugar that was being imported by the folks in the East. East Coast sugar, if you ever went to Brooklyn, people are familiar with the big Domino sugar building that's there. That sugar was run by a family called the Havermeyer family, another German family. And they controlled sugar in the East. They controlled it so well that they created a trust. That trust took up almost every sugar manufacturer in the country. They came to Spreckels and said, "You want to join the trust?" And he said, "No, I want to compete on my own terms." And so they got a small refinery in California, and they brought it into the trust. So in 1888, Spreckels decides, I'm going to compete with that trust. And he tells his family, his 4 sons that were working for him, his wife and his daughter, "Get ready, we're moving across the country to Philadelphia. I'm going to build the biggest sugar plant in the world." And he does, along the banks of Delaware River in 1888. Coincidentally, 1888 is when our surfer girl happened to be in Asbury Park. And he came to fight the Sugar Trust, and he was bouncing between Baltimore, Boston, New York, and Philadelphia, looking first for real estate, then trying to put together the people that could make him the bricks to build this monster factory that was going to cost him $5 million. So he was quite busy, and the Havermeyers didn't want to put up with this. They were plotting to sabotage, and the word to his sons was, be very careful. They paid off his accountants to figure out how his pricing was going to work. They paid off people in the factory to jam metal into the gears that was crushing the cane. They threw rats onto the first piles of sugar that he made in order to sabotage the works. And so there was a ban on his sons talking to the press. And I know this because Claus stayed in that summer in the Wissahickon Inn, which is just outside of Philadelphia in a little valley. And this little article here from the Philadelphia Times, July 22nd. "The great belle of Wissahickon is Miss Spreckels, the daughter of the Sugar King. She was born in the Sandwich Islands. She rides a white horse and has the corollary, besides $1 million. So she was there. He was there, except he got on a train to go check on his works in San Francisco. I know that because the train derailed. His private car rolled over and he crawled to safety. He was the only one in the car and he was unhurt. He left Emma behind, his son Rudolph behind. His other sons were seen on the boardwalks in Atlantic City, Cape May, and Long Branch at the Jersey Shore, a natural place to go for a few weeks when it got a little warmer in Wissahickon. And so Emma had opportunity, and she had a reason not to talk to the press. So I took all my findings and I went to some of the experts, because I'm not an expert in surfing. I'm not an expert in history. I'm just a curious guy who's looking for answers. And I went to, in Hawaii, Malcolm Galt Williams, who runs a site called Legendary Surfers. He tracks the history of surfing from Hawaii. Dr. Patrick Moser at Drury University is an anthology of surf writing instructor, and he's a surf historian. Mike May, who runs the New Jersey Surfing Hall of Fame, and Matt Warshaw, who runs the Encyclopedia of Surfing. I presented my evidence to each of them, and each of them came back to me and said, by all appearances, Emma is our surfer. She's the one. Now, I have no definitive proof. I have no receipt from the Coleman Hotel with her name on it. Coleman was the hotel in Asbury Park. It's called the Empress now, if you're ever down in Asbury Park. I have no evidence, but I'm pretty certain that Emma was the surfer girl. And I had that information, and it was interesting to me. And these are her Hawaiian friends. On the left, your left, is David Kalakaua, the elected king of Hawaii, the last king of Hawaii. His successor, his sister, Lili Lokalani, up top, her sister, Like, Princess Like, her husband, Archie Cleghorn, their daughter, who was heiress to the throne after Lili Lokalani, was Victoria Cleghorn, or Kaiulani, and her sister, Annie Cleghorn. Annie and Kaiulani were friends with Emma Spreckels. Emma was invited to the court of the king for breakfast in her honor as she was ready to come out when she was 16 years old, meaning be introduced to society. Emma was witnessed at the opera with them, with the king and his wife, Kapiolani. And Emma was involved because she went to the school with these gentlemen who were plotting to take over the islands of Hawaii, steal the government from the royalty. This Lauren Thurston, Sanford Dole, and Garrett Judd. These were the missionary sons that would wind up taking over Hawaii after the death of the king, and his sister took over. These are the brothers of Emma up top in the corner. John Dietrich Spreckels. John founded or bought the Coronado Hotel in San Diego, finished it. It was in bankruptcy, bought it out of bankruptcy, finished much of the city of San Diego, brought to it its bandshell, its public parks, its infrastructure. The Spreckels controlled the commerce, the boats between Hawaii and California, but also much of the commerce up and down the coast, because the Spreckels steamship line, which carried their cane, had a dominant position there. So they also controlled the coal delivery and much of the ports. Next to him is his brother, A.B., Adolf Spreckels. A.B. Didn't like a newspaper article that was written about him in the San Francisco newspaper. He walked into the offices of the newspaper, pulled out a gun, and shot at point blank range the reporter who wrote the story. He was acquitted in front of a jury. I don't know how, but later the judge and the chief prosecutor both got a free trip to Hawaii. I don't know I do know, but the two other brothers are Gus and Rudolph. Gus and Rudolph went into a war with their father and the two other brothers over the business. They fought. They're still the families that exist are still fighting today. They still don't get along. But the two brothers were also millionaires in their own right. They attracted the most beautiful women on the West Coast because they wanted to be their wives and wanted their money. Emma was surrounded by these people. The two gentlemen on the lower side are the suitors. Emma's, as a shy girl, wasn't very social, wasn't interested in playing the field, so to speak, these gentlemen were after her hand, and who wouldn't be? You know, she was the heir to the fortune. This is Samuel Shortridge. Samuel Shortridge, U.S. Senator Samuel Shortridge, was best friends with her brother John. The gentleman who sketched there is a guy named Thomas Watson. He was a commodities broker in San Francisco. They both wanted her hand. Talk about what the father said in a bit. This is Eleanor Coney after she remarried, and Hubert Voss painted her while they were in Kauai. Emma remained friends with her, and her other best friend was Aileen Ivers. Aileen Ivers was the most beautiful woman in San Francisco. She came to Philadelphia at the same time with Emma and her family. She stayed with her brother Gus and his wife. And Aileen was the one who found the husband in the East. The Spreckels weren't really welcomed in the East and wound up going back west. They also made up with Kalakaua. Spreckels had left after he had came east. He had left Kalakaua in the lurch, and was one of the reasons you had the downfall of the monarchy there. When he left, the missionary boys moved in and effectively at gunpoint changed the constitution for Kalakaua. So in researching a little more about David Kalakaua's life, in 1890, in December, he gets on a boat and he comes to San Francisco. And he comes for a visit, supposedly regain his health, which he never regains. But interestingly, his very first visit after church, because he went to church, he got off the ship, he went to church. They left church, and he and his entourage knocked on the door of a Howard Street home owned by Claus Spreckels, knowing full well Claus Spreckels wasn't there. He was back east. David Kalakaua went to see Emma Spreckels. No reason given, but that's who he knocked on the door of. David then goes to, gets on a boat and sails down to Coronado, spends Christmas there at the Coronado Hotel, Emma's brother's place. He comes back, and on his way back, he stops in Santa Barbara at an Olive Garden, and not the restaurant, but a true Olive Garden. And he has a stroke. He ultimately goes to the, oh, there's a ghost. He ultimately goes to the Palace Hotel in San Francisco, where he is in mid-January failing. He has Bright's disease, or his kidney failure. And as he's passing away, he is in Claus Spreckels' suite. Claus is by his side, as are several other people. Claus pays for the coffin, and David Kalakaua, after recording his voice on a new Edison gramophone, passes away, and he's given a state funeral. Emma, I believe, is quite conflicted at this point. She has a lot of blame for her father. He's caused a lot of problems in the Hawaiian archipelago. The father has now, at one point, condemned, and then later on reported that he is backing Liliuokalani for reasons that are unknown. He begins to build a house in San Francisco that is magnificent. No expense spared. He brings in artisans from all over the world. Emma's apartment in this house, which is a full block in San Francisco, cost $250,000. The estimate for the house is somewhere in the neighborhood of $3 to $5 million to build at that time. Ridiculous amount of money. Sandstone, supposedly fireproof. More to come. Emma's bathroom, gold fixtures, porcelain tub, metal doors, tiled up and down. The bathroom alone is so expensive that a group of plumbers and bath fixture salespeople from the East get on a train and come all the way out just to view the construction as it's under construction. This is Emma's prize, and all she has to do is marry the right man. So I can tell you that Emma doesn't marry the right man. Claus doesn't have a fireproof house. right? And anybody who knows anything about San Francisco knows that in a few short years, there's going to be an earthquake. Claus was seen closing the shutters on the house. They're not there now. They were attached to, you could attach them to the house, and they were called fire shutters. They would prevent fire from entering the house. It all looks good. If you cover the windows and it's the outside sandstone, how could it possibly burn down? It had these beautiful skylights on the top floors. And unfortunately, in order to stop the fires from coming, they dynamited homes in the neighborhood. And when they did, they broke the windows. And of course, that let the ash in, house burned from the inside out. And the most of the value in the home was not the structure itself, but it was the multi-million-dollar art collection that he had gathered from all over Europe and that Emma had helped pick out. And it house burned to the ground, along with much of Claus Spreckels' goodwill was gone with it. He did live another 2 years. He did make up with 2 of his sons. He didn't make up with his daughter. And if you read the book, you'll find out why and what happened with the drama there. But this is a story that started out with me just trying to figure out who might have been standing on a surfboard in Asbury Park in 1888. And then once I solved that problem, I was left with this wonderful life story that hadn't been told. And so I was grateful to be able to tell it. The book, if you'd like it, is here for you to read. Like I said, you can get it online. You can get it electronically. I make it really cheap to read it on your Kindle because I don't really want to make money. I just want people to read the book and hopefully be moved by it. So with that, I want to open this up to questions and see if there are anyone here. And anyone on the Zoom, use the chat feature and we'll take your questions.
So, are you the first one also to be a biographer of the Spreckels people?
So there had not been, there was one book written in the 60s. It's called Claus Spreckels in Hawaii. And it only spoke about Claus and his years in the Hawaiian kingdom. But it didn't talk about Klaus's time prior to that when he started and where he came from. Gave a little bit of background information. And it certainly didn't deal with Claus actually founding through his beet culture the entire salad bowl of California. He irrigated the Central Valley. The beets require a lot of water. They had to be irrigated. He spent $500,000 on irrigating the Maui Isthmus. If you've ever been to Maui, the island of Hawaii, that is the second most popular from a tourist standpoint. It's 2 big mountain ranges, the West Maui Mountains and Haleakala, which is a big volcano. In between was a dry isthmus. He was able to build ditches and water that and became an expert in watering plants and irrigation. And so he applied the same things to the Central Valley in California. And all of your lettuces and your strawberries and all those things that come from California are as a result of those fields being watered by Spreckels. And using that, you needed to rotate crops away from just the sugar. And so he leased the land out for that. None of that was covered. And I had met John D. Spreckels' biographer over the internet, a woman named Sandra Benora who lives in San Diego. She was writing his story, which she did. Subsequently, and after she helped me dig up some of the information on the Spreckels family, she began and is completing. And in June, we'll have a book out called Sugar King, which is the story of Claus Spreckels and the making of California. And so that'll be really the first time that someone's written a true biography of Claus. So this is the first one really that covers Emma, and the first one that truly covers the full life of Claus Spreckels is written there. And that I'm anxious to read because I was able to help with a lot. And she even has my quote on the back of the jacket. So I'm excited to see the book. Other questions?
There's nobody in the chat right now. Spreckels family still in sugar raising?
There is still a Spreckels brand sugar in California, sold mostly to commercial enterprises, not to the house. It used to be a household name in California, in Northern California. Claus had a place in Aptos. He had a ranch there that he had like 25,000 acres and raised horses. And that's where he started, just north of Monterey. And that's where he started growing sugar. And that Central Valley, there's a town called Spreckels there. And that town was a factory town that he built and grew sugar really up until there were multiple iterations of the company, but really as a single company, they were making sugar there until the 1970s. Thank you. Yes. Yes. It is the same family. I think it's Schuyler was the founding member of the company. And I believe that the Hamilton duel, if we go back in time, was significantly before, right? We're talking about the next generation. So it would be the son, not the father, the founder. But yes, that's the same family name. Schuyler was and in weaponry was the name in the United States. The contribution that Graham made was in certain rifle parts. He had some patents for certain makes of rifle. I'm not a armament guy, but that was why he was able to come into the company as the third partner. And he wound up dying. He came here to Harborage 2 years after this event. He came to here. He got cholera and passed away. We had some real problems with sewage in this area in those days. Yes, Sanford Dole. So Sanford Dole was a cousin. His cousin came to Honolulu in the early 1900s. In 1893, when the picture I showed you of Emma and her father and her mother on the boat, it's here in 1893. That send-off where all the leis are on them was from the supporters of Liliuokalani who wanted him to go back to Congress and lobby for Hawaii to be given back to the Hawaiians. We never truly annexed Hawaii. We kind of simply stole it and then allowed through an act of Congress for us to take control of it. And so she lived most of her life saying I was robbed. It was taken away from me, and the Hawaiian people believed it as well. So it was opportunistic business people who wanted the property. Dole came and said, well, you can have all kinds of fruit here, but can you really ship it? And he began to put pineapple in cans and realized that if he put it in cans, he could ship it as far as he wanted to, and it would last for months, and put it on ships. And it became the most popular food item to be shipped the longest distance as a packaged food in the early 1900s. And he's probably solely responsible for the Hawaiiana images that we have that were copied. In selling pineapple, it was more of a romantic sale. I'm going to sell you the dream that you're in Hawaii while you're eating it. Notwithstanding the fact that after a month, the canned pineapple at the time really wasn't very good. And they used lead seals on the cans, which probably wasn't very good for you either.
I visited Hartford. But it was in the historic museum. It was fascinating. I read all about the Doles and but they came as missionaries. So the cynical quick about them, then they ended up with this pineapple. So to cut from point A to point B quickly, the saying in Hawaii was the Doles came to Hawaii good, ended up really well.
And indeed they did, as did most of the missionary families. They were the sons of the missionaries. To be fair, if you go back to the 1830s when they landed and began to teach, really, or 1820s they started, they mostly lived poor lives, but they had 8, 10, 12 children. And if you married a Hawaiian, the Hawaiians were very happy to marry Americans. They were very happy you could then share your land. And the royal, the Ali'i, controlled all the property in Hawaii. And it went back to battles over kingdoms, right? So initially each island was a separate kingdom. Each area of an island was controlled by a different chief, and you pledge your loyalty to a chief, and you worked for them in serfdom. You didn't own the land, they didn't own the land. The land was your ancestor, and you celebrated the land. And if your chief was bad, you could move to another place in another valley, and you could plant your plants there and work for that chief. And when property rights came along in the 1830s, if you were a chief, you controlled the land. And if you were an American and you married a female chief, because Hawaii didn't, they had no disrespect for women. Women were held as in high regard as men as it related to land ownership. So if you married a woman who held a lot of land, guess what? Now you owned a lot of land, because in the American parlance, what's hers was mine, and what's mine is mine. And, unfortunately, that's American law is wound up, and English law wound up getting into the Hawaiian Constitution. And it disadvantaged terribly the women who had previously held significant power. And again, another reason why the Americans overthrew the Hawaiians, when they wound up with a queen. We didn't want to work for a native in the first place. Working for a native queen, forget it. They tossed her out nearly immediately. Yes. Yes.
Yeah, it's funny, we're talking about Hawaii more than Asbury Park, but Spreckels must have controlled Maui because those were in Oahu. And that sugar plantation, really, as you say, is the isthmus between these two mountains. I mean, sugar's still growing there, nobody's harvesting.
Yeah, so Spreckels had his largest works in Maui, but he also owned a large plantation on the Big Island of Hawaii in Honoka'a, if you've ever been there. He owned a large plantation there. In Oahu, he didn't control land, but what he did do, he had a partner named William Irwin. William Irwin's sister-in-law is Aileen Ivers, the beautiful woman from San Francisco. He married her sister, Fanny Ivers. Irwin was a partner of Spreckels because Irwin knew everyone in Hawaii, and he became the biggest factor in Hawaii. The factors were people who could buy stuff from other people and pass it on a middleman. And so when Spreckels first went out to Hawaii and he saw that he could arbitrage 2 cents on the price of sugar and bought it all, he used Irwin to do it. Irwin and Spreckels became the biggest buyer of sugar in Hawaii. So it didn't matter they didn't control all the plantations. He bought all the sugar. And by buying somewhere between 70 and 85% of the sugar that left the islands as raw sugar to be refined in California, he controlled the price that was paid. He also lent money to the people that wanted to grow it. So I was speaking earlier, my ancestors are from Newfoundland, they're fishermen. We were talking about, poor people and, how they struggled. They had an expression. And their expression was, we fished in the spring, we fished in the fall, and when we were done, we had nothing at all. They would borrow their money from the merchants who would then come back in the fall and buy their product from them. Same thing happened here. Spreckels would lend money. In fact, Spreckels and Irwin opened a bank so that they could lend money, because the Bank of Hawaii wouldn't lend money to everybody, but Spreckels would lend money to everyone. David Kalakaua wanted coins to be distributed, silver coins. Couldn't find anyone to back him in Hawaii. None of the interests wanted to do it. Spreckels said, no problem, I'll print them up in San Francisco. He did. He went to the mint. He got the coins made. He took a nice $150,000 profit on $1 million worth of coins, delivered them to the Treasury. The Treasury said, we're not going to distribute these. We're not going to put them into use. American coinage and pieces of 8 were really the things that people were using. We'll use American silver. No, thank you. Kalakaua wanted a real country. He wanted his own currency. And so Spreckels said, no problem. I'll distribute it out of the bank. And he did. He had his bank. He opened a second bank to distribute the money, and distributed the money, the coins. And the Hawaiians were very happy to have their own coinage, which they had until the Americans came and then took it away.
By the time he died, it was mostly out of Hawaii business.
By the time Claus Spreckels died in 1908, he still had holdings in Hawaii, but the vast majority of his income came from farming beet sugar he struggled to make it successful. There was a curly top disease that he had to cure, and eventually cured it right around 1898. And then beet sugar took off in California. And the other thing was, when Hawaii became a territory of the United States, they lost any economic advantage over California, because now you still had to ship the cane. It'd be far cheaper to grow beet and have the beet domestic right near your plants. And that's what he did. He started to build refineries right next to his fields. Claus Spreckels was born in 1826 and died in 1908. Yeah, he was in his early 80s when he passed away. He had diabetes, believe it or not, for a guy who sugar. Little irony. Was a beer drinker, and didn't really like sugary sweets, but a voraciously competitive man. And one of the scariest stories about him was fights that he would get into with his own kids. But he did get into a fight with a neighbor. A neighbor of his built a building, and the building was emitting smoke. It was an electrical plant. And he had just built the largest building in San Francisco to house San Francisco Call, because I mentioned earlier his son shot the newsman. He didn't like the newspaper, so he bought his own. He bought the San Francisco Call, put up this giant building, the biggest building in San Francisco. And this electrical plant was blowing its smoke and getting his building dirty. And he said, I don't like that. You got to stop that. And the guy said, no, I'm not going to do it. So what did he do? He started his own electric company, put the electric company out of business, and stopped the plant from smoking them up. And if you're ever out in California, Pacific Electric and Gas, it was Spreckels Electric Company. It was the survivor of the electric companies in California. So he was a pretty tenacious guy. He once took a guy to lawsuit while he was fighting with his daughter over which man she would marry. Right around the same time, he was fighting with a neighbor over 1.5 inches. The man built a building next to his building that encroached on his property by 1.5 inches. There was no setback requirement, and he went to court to have that man tear the building down. Yeah. Other questions?
Thank you.
Thank you. All right.
Thank you all for coming. I really appreciate it. Once again, it was a wonderful presentation by Vince or Vinny. You said Vinny, actually. Vinny, actually. So this book's available over here, and those of you who listen at Zoom, you know where to find it. One more time, the title of the book is
Forsaken Kings.
Forsaken Kings.
Emma Spreckels, The Surfer of Asbury Park. Book's $20 up here, cash and carry, or you can get it, like I said, online, or if you're a Kindle reader, you can get it for next to nothing.
Thank you very much. Good night, everybody.